You are looking at a scene that shouldn't exist. On the surface, it looks like a harsh, sun-scorched desert, rocks, dirt, and one lone figure. A young man sitting cross-legged, bare-chested, utterly exposed to the elements. He's holding a crude, stone knife, sharpening it with intense focus. But look closer. In the background there's a shimmering, almost invisible fence, a barrier. And behind that fence, watching him, are figures that will chill you to the bone. Several tall, impossibly thin gray beings. Aliens. This isn't a sci-fi movie, this is a survival test. Not just for this man but for the entire human species. The Galactic Council, a coalition of 47 advanced species, had stripped humanity of every piece of technology. No phones, no GPS, no tools, not even a bottle opener. They were dumped onto a fabricated wilderness and given one simple, terrifying rule. Survive 72 hours or your species is deemed unworthy of the stars. The challenge was designed to break them. The Vhalari, the proud architects of this trial, believed that without their gadgets, humans were fragile, soft, and utterly dependent. But what they failed to understand is that they didn't just remove humanity's technology, they forced them back to the Stone Age. And the human species? We built our first empires in the Stone Age. What you are about to witness is the definitive proof that the most dangerous, adaptive, and underestimated tool in the entire galaxy is the human mind. The moment the test started, this human, Captain Elias Korr, didn't panic, didn't cry for a signal. He calmly picked up a rock, struck it against another, and forged a razor-sharp hunting knife in under 90 seconds. This is the story of how two humans, Elias and Commander Nova Reyes, didn't just survive the galaxy's impossible test, but utterly conquered it, rewriting the rules of survival for every species watching. Before we dive into the arena and watch humanity fight for its existence, please take one quick moment. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a great survival story, and if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps us share these epic tales with a larger audience. We want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this story right now? Let us know in the comments and feel free to drop your own suggestions for our next story. Now let's get back to the trial. The clock is ticking. The Galactic Survival Assessment Center hummed with that specific, sterile efficiency you only found in a Vhalari installation. Think of the most high-tech, clinically perfect hospital, but stretched across a moon-sized facility. Every corridor was flawlessly aligned. Every light panel maintained an unnerving, uniform pulse. Every surface looked like it had been created moments ago. There was no dust, no clutter, and certainly no room for the unpredictable. This was absolute control, the core philosophy of the Vhalari. For them, survival was measured in precision, not in chaos. Standing before the main observation panel, Commander Kravos Thar'Zek of the Vhalari projected the serenity of someone who genuinely believed he had seen every possibility the universe could offer. His translucent skin rippled gently. For his species, that soft undulation was the equivalent of a mild, contained smile, a sign of amusement and intrigue. He was watching something unprecedented. Through the transparent walls of the containment chambers, representatives from 47 different species awaited the starting order. Each was in their own sector facing the exact same fate. Some species were performing strange, ritualistic preparation movements. Others were desperately trying to coordinate in small groups. A few simply stood motionless, trusting in the ancient strength of their biology. But here is the critical, terrifying truth. Not a single one of them knew what truly awaited them. They only knew this wasn't a simple exam, it was a galactic judgment. Kravos Thar'Zek's voice resonated throughout the entire facility when he activated the universal communicator. He announced the parameters of the test with cold, Vhalari emotionlessness. The parameters of the test are simple, he stated. Each species will be stripped of all technology. Every tool, every device, every artificial construct will be removed. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. You will be placed in an environment similar to the planet Terra, your Earth. Surviving for 72 standard hours will grant your species a sea-level classification. Then came the chilling ultimatum. Any result below that, Kravos Thar'Zek took a deliberate, calculated pause, will signify that the galaxy has no use for a species incapable of adaptation. Now let's look at the human cell, Sector Gamma 14. Commander Nova Reyes pressed her face against the transparent barrier, her eyes scanning the artificial landscape beyond. It was an expanse of temperate forest, a winding stream, a rocky outcrop to the north. The vegetation was carefully placed, the climate almost too perfectly balanced. It was nature designed with scientific precision, but it lacked the raw, messy cruelty of the real world. For most species, this environment would be challenging. For Nova, a xenobiologist who had spent 3 years surviving the absolute chaos of the Amazon basin, it was a puzzle she was already solving. Beside her, Captain Elias Korr was cracking his knuckles again and again. It was an automatic habit, a nervous tic that only appeared when the highly decorated diplomatic liaison was analyzing a situation with extreme, surgical attention. "This is insane," murmured Ambassador Celine Vale from the corner of the cell. "They are treating us like lab rats." "Because that's exactly what we are to them," Elias responded calmly, his voice barely raised. "We're the newcomers. They want to see if we're fragile. They want to see if we break." Nova turned toward them. She was only 26, the youngest xenobiologist on the human delegation, but her presence carried the unshakable calm of someone far more experienced. Her time in the Amazon had taught her how to read the earth, how to measure the wind, and how to interpret an unknown environment, even when that environment was trying to hide its dangers. Nothing in any academy could replace the invisible scars she carried. "Then we don't break," she said. "No drama. No doubt. Just a cold, hard fact." That statement set the tone for the human response right from the first second. Humanity wouldn't compete with the technology they lacked. They would compete with the pure, inscribed experience carried in every muscle, in every memory passed down through thousands of generations. The Vhalari, in their absolute arrogance, had never once considered that there was a difference between not having technology and not needing it. When the energy barriers finally dropped, chaos erupted like an uncontrollable storm. Across the 47 sectors simultaneously, creatures from distant worlds reacted with instinctive, total panic. There were high-pitched shrieks, alarm pheromones released into the simulated air, frantic movements, and desperate, useless attempts to activate non-existent devices. Many species actually depended on technological implants or devices to regulate basic bodily functions. Others had evolved in ecosystems so perfectly stable that they had never, ever needed to improvise. Without their tools, they immediately began to weaken. The humans, however, moved instantly with natural coordination. Nova shot out like an arrow, her gaze dissecting the terrain with surgical precision. Elias followed half a step behind, no words necessary. They had trained together long enough to anticipate each other's movements, share priorities, and divide tasks. There was zero hesitation. Nova inhaled deeply, analyzing the air. Rocky outcrop to the north, check. Water about 200 meters east, check. Deciduous trees, temperate climate. "We need shelter, water, fire, and tools," she said rapid fire. "In that order." "Tools and fire are mine," Elias instantly responded. "You find the water and the shelter." "Done. Meet you there." Meanwhile, in the observation room, Kravos Thar'Zek tilted his head. "Interesting," he murmured. "There is no fear in them. No confusion, no dependence. There is method, strategy, something the Vhalari had not predicted. The humans weren't reacting to the environment, they were evaluating it. And that was only the beginning. Nova reached the stream in less than 3 minutes. The water ran clean with no visible sediment, confirming that the environment had been designed to avoid major contaminants. Still, her instinct forced her to check the current, the texture of the riverbed, and the presence of edible vegetation. She crouched by the bank and began to examine the plants growing there. Some had structures similar to Earth species, suggesting the Vhalari had replicated familiar botanical patterns. Nova studied the roots, stems, and leaves, identifying which could serve as food, which were fibrous, and which could be used to cure materials. A few meters away, she spotted the opening of a small cave beneath a rocky overhang. The deep shadow it cast suggested natural protection from rain and enough space for a temporary refuge. She approached, inspected the interior, and verified that it held neither dangerous creatures nor burrowing animals. It had sufficient ventilation and a controllable access point. It was ideal. At the same time, Elias had reached the rocky outcrop. His eyes scanned the ground with the focus of someone accustomed to working with primitive lithology. He knelt to analyze stones of different sizes and compositions. "Quartzite," he muttered. "Not perfect, but it will do." He selected a slightly rounded stone to use as a hammerstone, or a percutor, and a larger, flatter rock to serve as the core. He sat cross-legged, placed the core rock on his thigh, and struck it firmly. The first impact created a platform. The second knocked off a sharp flake. The third strike refined the shape. In less than 60 seconds, he held a rudimentary but useful blade. It didn't need to be pretty, it needed to work. Back in the observation room, the Vhalari experts were following his every move. "Impossible," whispered Zyril Vun, a Nimran observer. He is detaching lithic blades without any kind of guide. No calculations. It is not magic, Kravos Thar'Zek corrected, though his translucent skin had lost its relaxed, gentle ripple. He is using fracture patterns that should require millennia to master. Elias kept polishing the tool. In 90 seconds, the time it takes to boil a small kettle, he had a knife more refined than most lithic instruments created by species in all previous trials. He saved the most useful fragments and moved toward a flexible green branch. He stripped the lace from his own boot to improvise a friction bow. Using his newly created blade, he carved a perfect notch into a piece of dry wood, which would serve as the fireboard to generate heat. When Nova returned, she found Elias putting the final loops of the shoelace cord around the vertical stick he would use to start the fire. "You're already set up," she said, a mixture of surprise and profound satisfaction in her voice. 90 seconds for the blade," he replied with a slight, almost cocky smile. "I'm losing my touch." Nova let out a short, amused huff. "Show off," she teased. "Well, I located the cave, the water source, and some edible roots." She held up several long plant fibers. "With this, we'll have cordage to make traps or nets tomorrow." The observation room was now beginning to fill up with representatives from other species, all drawn by the initial reports speaking of the astonishing human behavior. It was highly unusual to see beings supposedly belonging to a young species move with such immediate effectiveness in a totally unknown environment. Other groups in different sectors were barely managing to organize. Many had scattered without a strategy. Some had collapsed into full panic, unable to access their critical biotechnological tools. The humans, in stark contrast, were acting as if they had been born for this exact type of test. Elias completed the friction bow and began to work with strong, steady movements. The spindle stick rotated with increasing speed. The notch started to darken and soon, a small column of smoke rose from the fireboard. In a matter of seconds, the accumulated heat generated a glowing ember. Nova gently added dry fibers she had collected near the stream, blew carefully, and the first sustained flame sprang to life. "Perfect," Elias said, arranging a few stones to form a secure fire ring. "We have light and we have heat. And soon we'll have food," Nova added, showing him a long branch that would serve as a cooking support. As they worked, the totality of the environment became even clearer. There were no predators, no dangerous insects, and no extreme temperature fluctuations. It was a carefully balanced scenario, designed to measure organizational capacity, not genuine, brutal survival. "They made a mistake," Nova said, looking toward the simulated horizon. "They tried to create an Earth ecosystem, but they went to the opposite extreme. It's too perfect." Elias nodded. "Maybe they thought simplifying the environment would make the test more accessible." "For them, perhaps," she replied. "For us, this is a training ground." In the observation room, the main screens showed species after species failing. Unable to generate fire, unable to purify water, unable even to establish a safe perimeter. Reactions ranged from absolute bewilderment to total coordinative collapse. Kravos Thar'Zek watched without speaking. For the first time since the test began, his translucent skin was almost completely still, an unequivocal sign of deep tension among his Vhalari kind. Nova began collecting more fibers and roots near the water. Elias continued carving wood to perfect additional tools. They acted with such complete naturalness that it looked as if the environment had belonged to them forever. Every movement revealed mastery, not improvisation. For the observers, the truth was becoming crystal clear. The humans weren't just surviving, they were building a complete, cohesive strategy. And that was something no other species had ever demonstrated. It was the moment Captain Elias Korr and Commander Nova Reyes shifted from pure survival to active control of their environment. This transition, which happened seamlessly within the first few hours, was what truly terrified the alien observers. In the Vhalari Observation Center, the mood had soured considerably. Commander Kravos Thar'Zek no longer had the luxury of mild amusement. His translucent skin, once gently rippling, now showed sharp, almost geometric angles as he stood rigid before the main viewport displaying Sector Gamma 14. He was not just tense, he was recalculating the entire premise of the Galactic Survival Assessment. "They've established a Class B shelter," reported a Vhalari analyst, his voice flat with disbelief. "Fire is stable and they have 3 liters of water cached. Estimated time from barrier drop to stable setup, 47 minutes. The Ixari, a species that can manipulate local thermal energy, took nearly 6 hours to manage heat isolation." Kravos Thar'Zek watched Elias, who was now expertly using a freshly carved wooden point to drill a hole through a tough piece of bark. The resulting disc would be used as a simple compass needle, if he could magnetize it using a specific iron or he'd located near the stream. "They are improvising," Kravos stated, his voice low. "But the improvisation seems to be based on an incredibly complex, deep-seated knowledge base. It's not random. It's predictive." Beside him, Zyril Vun, the Nimran observer whose race specialized in mental processing, adjusted the energy field that comprised his body. Commander, the female Nova Reyes, is currently constructing a snare trap using simple fibrous roots. The design is a spring-loaded loop, utilizing a triple knot configuration. It is an ancient, highly efficient design that should be impossible to replicate without a visual reference or formal instruction. "She has done it 3 times in the last 5 minutes, the Vhalari analyst updated. And she is now testing the tensile strength of the fiber. She is not just building a trap, she is optimizing her material." This was the core difference. When the Korvath, the aggressive reptilian conquerors, were stripped of their technology, they tried to overpower the environment with brute strength, failing spectacularly. When the Centauri, the cunning merchant clans, were stripped of their technology, they tried to trade resources, which of course they didn't have. But the humans? They simply adapted their knowledge of physics, chemistry, and engineering to the resources at hand. They saw raw material where others saw only dirt and leaves. Elias, moving with the practiced efficiency of a veteran woodsman, was focused on food production. His priority was protein. He knew the temperate environment, though artificial, would contain smaller fauna. "Nova," he called out, his voice a low, focused hum. "We need bait. See if those red berries you found near the water are edible, but only test a tiny fragment. If they're safe, crush them." Nova, who had just secured her 3rd snare, nodded. She meticulously prepared a tiny, almost microscopic sample of the berry, rubbed it against her inner forearm and waited. When no reaction occurred, she carefully tasted a sliver. The berry was tart but edible. "Clear," she confirmed. "Good for bait, maybe a light snack but low nutritional value." This coordinated effort, relying on observation, analysis and trust, was their greatest asset. They weren't 2 individuals, they were a single highly specialized survival unit. Elias was the toolmaker and hunter. Nova was the botanist, strategist and resource manager. They complemented each other perfectly. With the crushed berries as bait, Nova began strategically placing her snares around the perimeter of their cave shelter. She wasn't just setting them, she was considering the likely movement paths of small animals, calculating the effect of wind and gravity on the loop. It was applied geometry solved not with a calculator but with instinct. Elias meanwhile took his stone blade and began work on a throwing spear. This required more advanced technique. He used the sharp edge to scrape and shape a long, straight sapling, hardening the point over the flame of their controlled fire. The process was slow, methodical, and visible to every alien species watching the feed. Ambassador Celine Vale, who was primarily tasked with observing the alien reactions, stepped closer to the fire. Her job was to remain calm, project confidence, and conserve energy. She was the anchor, the one who would deal with the aftermath. "You make it look easy, Elias," Celine murmured, watching the spear take shape. Elias paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's not easy, Celine. It's necessary. The Vhalari believe technology defines us. They think we're helpless without it, that our brains have atrophied because we rely on machines for everything." "And what are we proving?" she asked, her voice hushed. Elias held up his stone knife, the one he'd made in 90 seconds. It looked ancient, brutal, and stunningly effective. "We're proving that this knife, this spear, this fire, they aren't inventions. They are extensions of the human will. Our technology is just a reflection of our ability to manipulate the environment. That ability? That's hardwired. They can take away the laptop, but they can't take away the source code." This simple observation resonated deeply in the observation room. The Ixari, telepathic scholars, sent out subtle, worried signals. The Thalzari, nomadic void-faring scavengers, were suddenly showing respect, a species known for its profound skepticism. Kravos Thar'Zek was growing visibly agitated. He initiated a private channel with the other members of the Galactic Council. "The human performance is statistically anomalous. They are recovering too quickly. Their base survival knowledge is too refined. This compromises the integrity of the assessment." Zyril Vun, the Nimran, countered, "Commander, the rules were simple. Survive without technology. They are following the rules. Their use of rudimentary tools is not technology, it is application of innate intelligence." but it gives them an insurmountable advantage. Kravos insisted. The Drelnari are suffering cellular breakdown due to the inability to regulate their hydration cycle without their filtration units. The Vhalari are freezing without their crystalline heat exchangers. The humans are thriving. Kravos decided on a contingency. He ordered the environmental control systems to introduce a variable, temperature instability. The Vhalari technicians protested, citing the rules of the assessment, but Kravos overruled them. We must test their resilience to change, he declared. If they are truly adaptable, they will overcome this. In Sector Gamma 14, the ambient temperature began to plummet rapidly. Nova, who was checking her snares, immediately felt the change. The warm, comforting air of the controlled environment was replaced by a sharp, cutting chill. It was a sudden, unnatural drop, not a seasonal change but a direct manipulation. Elias, the temperature, she called out, hurrying back to the cave. Elias was already reacting. He didn't waste time on a sophisticated theory. He knew the Vhalari were watching. This wasn't bad luck, it was a deliberate countermeasure. They're cheating, he said without a trace of anger. Good. It means we're winning. They immediately started collecting heavier logs and dry leaves, banking the fire deeper inside the cave to maximize heat retention. Nova focused on insulation using large, pliable pieces of bark and moss to cover the cave entrance, leaving only a small gap for air and smoke. We need thick blankets, Nova said, looking at their thin, modern synthetic clothes, now utterly useless against the cold. We make them, Elias said simply. He grabbed his stone blade and began methodically stripping the fibrous inner bark from a specific type of tree, the same kind Nova had used for cordage. The Vhalari, watching this new, feverish activity, expected confusion, desperation, and ultimately failure. They expected the humans to shiver, become lethargic, and succumb to hypothermia, just as several other less adapted species in other sectors were already doing. But Elias and Nova did not shiver. They did not slow down. They worked faster, driven by the cold, fueled by strategy. They knew that the best defense against cold wasn't just fire, it was clothing, and the best material was already available to them. They used their new cordage to weave the fibrous bark into thick, rough cloaks. It was primitive, uncomfortable, but astonishingly effective. Just as the temperature dropped to near freezing, Nova and Elias wrapped themselves in their improvised garments. They sat close to the banked fire, sipping warm, boiled water, protected by their insulated entrance. They were not just surviving the cold, they were successfully mitigating it, all without a single piece of Vhalari-approved technology. In the observation room, Kravos Thar'Zek stared, dumbfounded. He had introduced an obstacle designed to crush unprepared species. Instead, he had only provided the humans with more resources. The fibrous bark that helped them survive the cold also yielded a sturdier material than any they had yet found. The Vhalari had tried to stop the human machine by turning off the power. But the humans simply found the crank and started generating their own. The temperature dive, Kravos Thar'Zek's desperate countermeasure, had failed to break Elias and Nova. Instead, it had served only to illuminate the speed and effectiveness of human adaptation. While other species across the assessment center were struggling to maintain core body temperature, the humans in Sector Gamma 14 were insulated by their rough, fibrous bark cloaks, sitting comfortably next to a well-banked fire. In the observation room, the sheer psychological impact of this success was becoming paralyzing. The Vhalari, who pride themselves on prediction and control, were witnessing an anomaly that defied their science. They are generating their own entropy, muttered Kravos Thar'Zek, watching the screen where Elias was now attaching the hardened spear point to the shaft with incredibly strong cordage made from the same fiber as their cloaks. They create chaos and then they harvest resources from it. Zyril Vun, the Nimran observer, finally stepped forward, his energy field flickering slightly, a sign of deep concentration. Commander, you must cease the environmental manipulation. The test is flawed if you continue to introduce variables designed to fail one specific species. The test is designed to find weakness. Kravos snapped, his composure finally cracking. And if their weakness is their dependence on stable conditions, then we must expose it. No, Commander, Vun countered, his voice steady. Their strength is their adaptability. And by making the environment hostile, you are simply giving them a target for their adaptation. They see challenges as opportunities. And Vun was precisely right. Inside the cave, Elias was demonstrating exactly what that opportunity looked like. The cold had forced them to increase their fire size, which meant they now had an abundance of glowing embers and ash. Time for the next phase, Elias announced to Nova, his eyes gleaming with focused energy. The metal phase. The metal phase? Nova questioned. We haven't found any or Elias. Not bulk ore, he corrected, but iron oxide is everywhere. Look at the stream bed. The rust-colored sediment. He took one of the stronger bark containers he'd woven, filled it with the sediment-rich dirt near the water, and mixed it with ash from the fire. This wasn't sophisticated metallurgy, but a primitive form of flux and reduction. He placed the mixture directly into the hottest part of their deep fire pit, under a covering of damp moss and charcoal to create an oxygen-starved, high-heat environment. We don't need a furnace, Elias explained, stirring the mixture with a stick. We just need a bloom. A lump of spongy iron. This was a profound leap. They were moving from the Stone Age directly into the Iron Age, skipping bronze entirely, in less than 6 hours. The significance was not lost on the observers. The ability to manipulate materials to create tools stronger than stone was the foundation of almost all galactic technology. While Elias worked the improvised furnace, Nova went to check her snares. The cold weather had driven small animals to seek shelter, and her strategic placement paid off. She found 3 small rabbit-like creatures caught in the loops. She approached the catch with reverence, not victory. Elias, we have protein. Enough for the next 2 days. Excellent work, Commander, he said, turning the hot bloom mixture. We eat well tonight. The subsequent process was a masterclass in efficiency. Nova carefully prepared the animals, saving every part. The meat for cooking, the pelts for future insulation and softening, and the bones for potential needles or tools. She then purified their water by boiling it over the flame, adding specific plant fibers she knew had antibiotic properties. Elias, after pulling out the smoking, solidified iron ash bloom, used his largest stone blade as a makeshift hammer and anvil. He began to pound the hot, spongy metal, forcing out the slag and impurities. He was not trying to forge a sword, but a simple, crucial tool, an awl and a small wedge. The difference was immediately apparent. The small, rough awl made from this primitive iron bloom was strong enough to pierce the thick hide of the animals, allowing Nova to stitch the pelts together using bone needles she had refined from the femurs of the small creatures. We have true warm gear now, Nova stated, holding up the first crudely stitched hide. This will ensure our survival even if they drop the temperature again. And the wedge? Nova asked, looking at the small iron spike Elias had created. Elias smiled, a genuine, confident grin. The wedge is for the next stage. We need to stop relying on surface resources. We need to go vertical. Elias took the iron wedge and used his hammerstone to drive it into a fissure in a large, flat rock near the cave entrance. He wedged it deep, then hammered on the side of the wedge. With a sharp crack, the larger rock split, revealing a cleaner, stronger granite underneath. The stone was now easily breakable, perfect for making higher-quality axes and hammerheads, far superior to the quartzite he started with. The observation room collectively recoiled. He is improving the quality of the raw material, gasped a Korvath delegate. They are manipulating geology. This is far beyond baseline survival. Kravos Thar'Zek felt a cold dread settle over him. The humans were not only adapting to the external environment, but they were actively adapting their own technological timeline. They were moving from Paleolithic to Neolithic to the Iron Age in a matter of hours, all based on a deep, intuitive understanding of materials science. Ambassador Celine Vale, watching this unfold from her position near the fire, felt a surge of pride. She wasn't building the tools, but she understood the diplomatic implications of every move. She observed the screens that displayed the other 47 sectors. The Drelnari, the hive-minded zealots, were paralyzed, their strict social structure shattered without their communication network. The Centauri were dehydrated and fighting amongst themselves over a few dry roots. The Vhalari were huddled into a crystalline pile, desperately trying to generate friction to create heat, failing repeatedly because their silicon bodies were poor insulators. The other species were either declining rapidly or stagnating. But in Sector Gamma 14 the humans were thriving. They had meat, fire, water, specialized tools, and now superior clothing. I have confirmed that the Nimran observer is now actively arguing against the Vhalari commander, Celine whispered to Elias, who was now shaping a heavier, more balanced stone axe head. Your rapid advance is causing internal friction in the council. Good, Elias responded, not looking up. The best defense is a devastating offense. We're not just surviving, we're showing them that their test is irrelevant. He secured the new granite axe head to a stout wooden handle, tying it tightly with the bone-reinforced cordage. It was a formidable tool, capable of felling small trees. Nova walked out with their new hide clothing, securing her own with a carved wooden toggle. She looked at Elias, then at the new axe. "What's next, Captain Korr?" she asked. "We have everything we need to wait out the next 60 hours. Elias stood up, the granite axe heavy and reassuring in his hands. He looked toward the artificial boundary of the sector. "Survival is passive, Commander Reyes," he said. "We don't need to just survive. We need to show them why they made a mistake in bringing us here." He pointed the axe toward the thickest stand of trees they could see. "We've mastered the cave. Now we master the forest. We build a permanent structure, a genuine shelter that proves our civilization isn't dependent on their grace. We show them the capacity for organized, permanent construction. We make this place home." The decision was clear. They were going from survivors to builders. The Galactic Council wanted a baseline. The humans were about to give them an entire evolutionary history compressed into one trial. With the new granite-headed axe, Elias and Nova were no longer just resourceful survivors. They were engineers armed with powerful leverage. Their goal, as Elias stated, was to stop being passive guests of the cave and become the masters of the forest. The final 36 hours of the trial would be dedicated to building a structure that screamed permanence and superiority. In the Vhalari Observation Center, the atmosphere was one of silent, deeply rooted professional embarrassment. Kravos Thar'Zek stood with the rigidity of a statue, his focus locked on Sector Gamma 14. His earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by professional desperation. "The humans have begun construction," reported the Vhalari analyst, his voice strained. "They are felling small trees. No, wait, they are selectively felling young trees that will be easier to process, maintaining the integrity of the ecosystem. They are exhibiting environmental consideration." Zyril Vun, the Nimrin, noted, "They are using a basic post and lintel design, but integrating a system of interlocking joints. Observe the detail. The axe is being used to rough-cut the logs, but the original 90-second stone blade is being used to make precision carvings for the joints. It is a seamless blend of Stone Age power and refined engineering." Elias, moving with the practiced rhythm of a professional carpenter, was the construction foreman. He had divided the labor perfectly. He felled and shaped the load-bearing timbers, creating strong, flat surfaces. Nova, the resource manager, gathered the secondary materials: smaller branches for roofing support, specific grasses for thatch, and mud from the stream bed to serve as chinking between the logs for insulation. "This is not mere shelter," Nova remarked as she carefully applied a thick layer of mud and fiber into a gap, reinforcing the wall. "This is architecture. We are making a statement." "The statement is simple, Commander," Elias grunted, driving a newly carved wooden peg into a joint. "We are capable of turning chaos into order, and we can do it faster than any species that relies on a pre-built kit." The construction process became the perfect visual summary of human intelligence. The Vhalari had assumed that if they took away the blueprints and the specialized machinery, humanity would forget the concept of structure. They had been catastrophically wrong. The knowledge of how to build a waterproof roof, how to transfer load weight, and how to stabilize a four-walled structure was ingrained in human consciousness. They weren't reinventing the wheel. They were simply building a better one using available sticks and stones. As the structure began to take shape, a sturdy, small two-room cabin with a raised floor to mitigate dampness and a steeply pitched roof to shed water, the emotional impact on the observation deck was palpable. The Korvith delegates, known for their aggressive, simple structures, were openly arguing amongst themselves. The Drelnari, though still suffering, were fixated on the human sector, their hive mind buzzing with conflicting data. Kravos Thar'Zek knew he was losing not just the test but the argument. He tried one last, desperate measure. "Introduce fauna," he commanded. "A small, non-lethal predator. We must see how they handle a dynamic threat without technological assistance." A Vhalari drone silently deposited a cage containing a few domesticated Tracian canids, replacing the previous Tracian species name, but maintaining the idea of a simple predator. Cunning, medium-sized, pack-hunting creatures that the Vhalari often used in their internal training simulations. The creatures were released about a kilometer from the human camp, programmed to seek out the strongest thermal signature. The moment the Vhalari introduced the threat, Nova's head snapped up. She didn't need a sensor. She heard the subtle shift in the forest silence. The birds stopped singing. The small stream sound seemed muffled. "Elias," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We have company. Predator class." Elias immediately grabbed his spear. He knew their new cabin was secure, but their perimeter was vulnerable. Defense first. We finished the palisade around the cache. They had already started a low barrier of interwoven branches around their supply of cured meat and stored water. They now worked furiously to strengthen it. When the Tracian canids arrived, 3 sleek, low-slung, highly focused animals, they didn't rush in blindly. They circled, testing the human defense, looking for a weakness in the perimeter, exactly as Kravos Thar'Zek intended. Elias and Nova stood back-to-back near the entrance of their structure, their body language radiating calm assurance. Elias held the spear, Nova held the granite axe. They didn't shout or panic. They were utterly silent, waiting for the animals to commit. "They want the meat," Nova whispered, pointing with her chin toward their cache. "We let them think they can get it," Elias replied. The moment one of the canids made its move, attempting to jump the low palisade, Elias moved. It wasn't a reckless charge but a measured, tactical advance. He didn't try to kill the animal outright. Instead, he used the heavy spear to intercept its jump, forcing the creature to recoil with a sharp, painful thwack against its ribs. The sound sent a shockwave through the pack. The canids, bred for easy kills, were accustomed to prey that ran, not prey that stood its ground and counterattacked with focused force. Nova then utilized the second crucial element of their defense: fire. She grabbed a few burning brands from the fire pit and hurled them toward the encircling animals. The sight and smell of the sudden, aggressive flames were enough. The pack broke formation and retreated into the woods, yelping. In the observation center, Kravos Thar'Zek slowly lowered his head. "They used basic psychology," he said, defeated. "They didn't use superior force. They used superior threat assessment and calculated deterrence." Zyro Vun, the Nimrin, spoke with clear authority. "Commander, the human species has survived 2 deliberate attempts by the Vhalari to fail the assessment. One environmental, one biological. They have demonstrated the capacity for rapid technological acceleration, architectural engineering, advanced logistics, and tactical deployment against a dynamic threat. The test is complete." The 2 humans returned to their cabin, their breathing barely elevated. They sealed the door and returned to the quiet work of preparing their evening meal. The last 12 hours passed in peaceful, constructive activity. Elias improved the security of their hide clothing by using a small piece of the iron bloom to sharpen his bone needles to an impossible fine point. Nova used the new granite axe to hollow out a small section of a log to create a storage container, protecting their valuable cordage and plant materials from the elements. They were no longer surviving. They were simply living. They had compressed 10,000 years of human ingenuity into a single, comprehensive 72-hour period. When the final alarm sounded, a soft, pleasant tone signifying the completion of the 72 hours, Elias and Nova were sitting inside their sturdy, warm cabin, sipping boiled water from bark cups. They had not just endured, they had flourished. The energy barriers dropped entirely, and the Vhalari retrieval team, along with Ambassador Celine Vale, entered the zone. Celine rushed forward but stopped dead when she saw the scene. The small, rugged cabin was a masterpiece of primitive engineering. It wasn't the survival camp of desperate refugees, it was the home of capable pioneers. "Captain Korr, Commander Reyes," Celine said, struggling to keep the amazement out of her voice. You did it." Elias merely smiled, rising to his feet, the stone knife still tucked into his belt. "We didn't just do it, Ambassador. We redefined it." The moment the Vhalari retrieval team entered Sector Gamma 14, the mission shifted entirely from a survival test to a diplomatic spectacle. Commander Kravos Thar'Zek personally led the delegation, stepping through the newly lowered energy barrier with a face that was a mask of Vhalari neutrality, a difficult feat when one is trying to hide profound astonishment. The sight that greeted them was undeniable proof of human success. It wasn't the mess of a desperate survival attempt. It was the organized, coherent foundation of a future settlement. Ambassador Celine Vale walked beside Kravos Thar'Zek. Her posture was relaxed but firm, projecting quiet confidence. She didn't need to speak, the cabin spoke for itself. Kravos Thar'Zek's gaze swept over the meticulously crafted shelter, the banked fire, the prepared food cache, and finally settled on the 2 humans. Captain Elias Korr and Commander Nova Reyes stood calmly, their crude hide and bark clothing now looking like uniforms of honor. "Captain Korr." "Commander Reyes," Kravos began, his voice a low, formal drone. "The Galactic Council assessment has concluded. You have successfully navigated the required 72-hour period." "Navigated, Commander?" Elias asked, gently touching the rough-hewn wooden doorframe of the cabin. "I believe the term is conquered. We have built a permanent dwelling, established a sustainable food and water source, and successfully neutralized a dynamic biological threat, all within the parameters set by the Vhalari. Kravos Thar'Zek hesitated, a rare sign of Vhalari confusion. Your efficiency is unprecedented. You accelerated your technological development from the Paleolithic to the Iron Age in less than 3 days. This was not the expected outcome. Nova, never one to let an advantage slip, stepped forward. She held out the original stone blade, the one Elias had forged in 90 seconds. It looked utterly primitive next to the Vhalari's sleek, metallic armor, but its significance was immense. Commander Thar'Zek, she said, her voice clear and resonant. The test, as stated, was to survive without technology. You attempted to measure us by what we lacked. We have demonstrated that our value is in what we possess. The ability to analyze a system, adapt our knowledge, and manipulate the natural world to our will. Celine Vale seized the diplomatic opening. The human species requires the mandated sea-level classification, effective immediately, based on the unambiguous success of this trial. The Vhalari commander looked past the humans to the perimeter fence. There, waiting with profound interest, was Zyro Vun, the Nimran observer, flanked by delegates from the Ixari, the Centauri, and even the aggressive Korvath. The Nimran spoke through a shared frequency, his voice echoing in the observation system. Commander Thar'Zek, the consensus among the independent observers is absolute. The humans not only survived but excelled. They outperformed every single other participating species, many of whom possess vastly superior biological advantages. Kravos Thar'Zek knew he was beaten. The results were public, visible to 47 civilizations. He gave a sharp, clipped nod of acknowledgement. The classification is granted. The human species is now designated sea level. A silent, invisible wave of energy swept through the entire assessment center. It wasn't an explosion of noise, but an unexpected surge of multi-species approval, subtle vibrations, sonic pulses, flashes of light, and soft chemical signals. It was the way 47 distinct species expressed recognition, respect, and awe. As the retrieval drones came to collect the human team, Celine Vale helped Elias and Nova put on their diplomatic clothing, though they kept their crude, yet effective hide cloaks draped over their shoulders, a symbolic trophy of their victory. As they walked towards their assigned corridor, Elias murmured to Nova, "Do you think they will ever repeat this test?" Nova smiled, gently turning the polished stone knife in her fingers. The quartzite caught the light. "I don't think so. After this, they know they can't ask us to compete on a ground where we have the advantage simply because we have existed the way we have." Elias chuckled, a sound of soft, tired satisfaction. "So what exactly did we demonstrate?" Nova tucked the knife securely into her pocket. "A personal memento. Something very simple, Captain. We showed them that we don't need to be the strongest, the fastest, or the most innately technologically gifted. We just need to be the best at adaptation. And that," she concluded, looking back at the abandoned cabin, "is something they can't replicate." In the observation room, Kravos Thar'Zek watched the screens flicker off, one by one, leaving only the image of the small, silent, perfectly built human cabin. The test wasn't about technology, he realized, defeated. It was about understanding that the true human tool wasn't a computer, a phone, or a starship. The true human tool is humanity itself. And for the first time since the creation of the Galactic Survival Assessment Center, the Council began to consider the unthinkable, creating a special category, a unique designation designed exclusively for a species that had achieved the impossible. The humans had not just survived. They had taught the galaxy a definitive, powerful lesson about the enduring strength of the pioneering spirit. They had, quite simply, earned their place among the stars. And that is the incredible, true story of how Captain Elias Korr and Commander Nova Reyes proved that the human mind is the most powerful technology in the universe. If this story of determination, ingenuity, and sheer force of will resonated with you, please show your support. Take a second to like this video, share it with your friends, and if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and turn on those notifications so you don't miss our next epic tale. Did the Vhalari get what they deserved? Was the stone knife the ultimate piece of evidence? Let us know your thoughts and suggestions for future stories in the comments below. We have an incredible channel playlist full of more stories that explore the edges of human potential and galactic intrigue, so make sure to check that out right after this video. Thank you for watching, and may you always find the strength to adapt, build, and conquer your own challenges. We wish you all the best. Peace out.